Welcome to Showboat, a series of podcasts from the Battleship North Carolina in Wilmington. I'm Danielle Wallace, Programs Director, and this is the fourth episode in a special series about the new Battlestar Collection. Today, I'm talking with Steve Watkins of Ironman Knives and Forge and his apprentice, Billy Brooks. Steve, you were our first vendor for the Battlestar Collection. And I was just wondering if you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've been a full-time knife maker, bladesmith, for about 10 years. And I grew up in the Midwest and hunting and fishing, and it was just part of what we did. And so having a good knife, my dad passed down, having a good knife was important. Having a sharp knife was even more important.
Why is having a good knife and a sharp knife so important?
I think it's their generation. My dad's a boomer. He was born in 42. And his dad was a machinist. So not to get too long-winded, but he was one of 12 kids. All those 11 kids became farmers. He was the outlier. He was the machinist. And working with tools and working with his hands, having good tools is important. So, and then if you have a knife, it's a tool. And if you're going to have a knife, it needs to be razor sharp so that it can do its job. So those are just those old school practices that were passed down to me. And so to this day, and you can ask Billy, I am a little bit compulsive obsessive about sharpening knives and having them sharp and making sure they work the way they're supposed to work.
Okay, well that makes sense. I love that history element of it, that connection that you have to your family, because we are sort of seeing that as a theme. Mm-hmm. One of the connections or aspects of the Battlestar Collection is that we're saying steel, wood, our stories, your stories. They're each one is different, but they're all the same. And again, I'm seeing how all of these stories are sort of tying in, but yet they each have this little spread and that's slightly different. So I love that.
Well, and as I was driving up, Billy hadn't been to Wilmington before, and he hasn't seen the ship. And so as we're driving up, you see the conning tower as you're coming in, and he said, that's really cool. And I said, it's humbling. And exact words, because, when you think of all the people that have walked on this ship, all the people that have fought for freedom, that have given their lives, that have given arms and limbs and devoted their lives to making everybody else better, then I want to take those materials and I don't want to make something simple out of them. What do I mean by simple? I don't want to make something that you sit on a shelf and you don't think about again. I want to make something that you pass down to your great-great-grandkids. This ship was built in 1937. It's still here. It's still important. It's still fascinating and interesting. And I want to take the wood and that steel and commemorate that in a way that I believe does it justice, or at least I try to.
Well, I will say that when we first opened the Star Collection, your knife, the Kill Devil Hills Explorer, was the very first sale, and I think that it sold within hours of the store being open. So when I saw that, I was like, here we go, we are off to the races. But when you were approached to be this vendor to create the knives, what was the first thought that sort of went through your head?
I have a tendency to say yes without thinking. So the first thought that went through my head was, listen to what they're saying and listen to. I wanted to make sure I could fulfill the needs. I didn't just want to say yes and wing it. I wanted to make sure that I thought this is an important project. This is, like I just said, how, it's inspiring. And I wanted to make sure that I was prepared to step up to the plate and to raise myself up to the bar that I thought I needed to raise myself up to, and make sure that I could do that.
And I know we've talked a little bit earlier. The first time I actually met you, I talked to you on the phone and stuff, but when you came to Wilmington and when I met you for the first time, you said, wow, this steel does some really crazy things when you were working with it. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so anytime you work with steel, any bladesmith, so there's a myriad of steels that you can choose from, and they all have different qualities. Some are tougher, some are more brittle, but whatever they are, the more and more you work with it, the better you get at bringing out those properties. And so most bladesmiths will kind of go down a path. They'll try a few different steels and then they'll settle on something, and then they'll work with that for years, and then they become experts at it. And so the first thing that I did was I had the steel analyzed, sent it off, had it analyzed, and it came back. And in the analyzation, there wasn't anything that stood out as odd, but you only find what you're looking for. And so when I started working with the steel, I was like, all right, I need to make a knife and run a test. And so what I knew about the steel from the analyzation was that it would not harden. And so to have a knife, you have to be able to harden the steel, or you need to be able to take the steel and mix it into a process or marry it to a hardenable steel. So that was the first thing I did, and I thought, so there's a technique that's laminating pieces of steel together. So what we did is we took a piece of carbon steel that we knew would harden, and then I took 2 pieces of ship steel and sandwiched them on the outside like an Oreo cookie. And then when I would grind down through to the edge, it would reveal the carbon core. So it would be hard at the edge, but you could still see a distinct line where the ship steel started and stopped. So that was the first thing I wanted to see was, okay, can I make this steel weld to this carbon steel? So that was our first test. And so I did that. Everything worked, made the knife, and then when you're in this process, you're making the knife and everything's just kind of rough and ugly, and then as you're refining it and cleaning it up, you start seeing things. And I started seeing this pattern appear in the steel. And it was super interesting, super cool, and I had no idea what it was.
A pattern. So what are you saying? Is it
swirls?
swirls?
Paisleys. It looked like paisleys
Whoa.
or swirls. So, and what I came to find out, so through working with it, and so then you start going down the rabbit hole. All right, how do I make this happen every time? Can I make this happen every time? What was my process? You start backtracking, doing all these things. And so what it is it's alloy banding. And so when we're heating up this steel, and anytime you take steel and you heat it up past about, I don't know, you get it somewhere around 2,000 degrees, all of the molecules, it's glowing orange on the outside, and it's starting to get soft and almost sticky. But on the inside, every single molecule has let go of the other molecules. And we call it going into solution. So in a hardened piece of steel, if I kind of go in reverse, in a hardened piece of steel, if you were to look at it under a microscope, it would look like a kind of like a octagon, like a crystalline octagon shape. And then on the corners, you would have molecules. You'd have a carbon molecule attached to an iron molecule, and that's what causes the hardening. When you heat that up, all those molecules separate, and they're out in space, so to speak. And when you do that and those molecules start moving around, they can band up and migrate. That's called alloy banding. So I still don't know what's in there. I think it could be, and this is a wild guess, it's just because when we weld it, when we work with it, it gets very shiny. I think it could be some type of nickel. And so my wild guess is that maybe that was kind of for corrosion resistance, being out at sea. Nickel's extremely tough and wear resistant. So that was kind of my thought, was maybe it's some type of nickel. And then I have a very good friend who's a professional welder, and as soon as he started welding on it, he's like, there's nickel in this. I said, that's what I thought. So may or may not be, but regardless, whatever it is, these compounds that they have mixed into the steel to put it on the body, on the hull of the ship for the purposes, that it's going to be used for, they've mixed in alloys for that purpose. And when we heat that up, those alloys band together, migrate, and then they form hardened soft spots on the outside in this ship steel. And then once we make the knife, clean it up, and I can put it into an acid bath solution, which starts to very, very slowly eat the steel away. And what it does is it eats the soft spots away a little bit faster, and leaves the hard banded spots a little bit more proud or raised. You can barely feel the difference, but you can see it. And then when we buff it up and polish it, you can see all of this crazy swirling figuring throughout the knife. And I just thought it was so cool and so particular to this steel that I wanted to bring that out if I could. And so then that sent me down another rabbit hole and another rabbit hole. But I'm pretty happy with the results we've got.
Well, I've seen the knives, and it's absolutely true in that each one is completely different, and that it does have that look. And for listeners, what we will try to do is put some of the different knives on the website for people to sort of see close-up pictures of how each one is different, so they can sort of visualize more what you're talking about. How long did it take you to do that first knife?
I'm going to say that first knife probably, I'm going to say about 3 weeks, something like that. I made it, and then all these weird things started happening with that steel, and then I would polish it one way, and then I would dip it in the acid again, and then I just kept working it and trying to figure out what to do with it. So it took me about 3 weeks to kind of get that first knife where I wanted it, and then I started making a run of like 8 knives or 10 knives. I don't remember exactly how many at that time, and then just trying to refine that process, and then trying to get some repeatable results took another month probably. And then now we've got it down. We know how to make it. If it's going to do it, we know how to make it. And every now and then, and what I find is every plate of steel is different. Some have more of this alloy in it, some have less, and so some have more figure, some have less figure. And I think it all depends on where it was standing on the ship and how it was poured and what day they made it or whatever. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know how to get the best result that we can get.
So the Battleship keeps you on your toes.
Absolutely.
Oh, very good. Now, I know that you made, along with the Kill Devil Hills, you made a first run of limited oyster shuckers, and those, of course, sold out, I think, within a month or so of us having them. They're gone. So tell me about those original shuckers, and then I know that you've come up with another shucker that Billy helps you with.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first shucker I did in a similar way to the knives. I took 2 pieces of steel, 1 piece of carbon steel, 1 piece of ship steel, heated them up to 2200 degrees until they're just about to melt, and then I would put both these pieces into a 50-ton press and squeeze them, and it would attach one piece to the other. Then I would grind them, and I would kind of try to do that same thing to try to get the results. Super labor intensive and cool, but super labor intensive. So then we just kind of refined that process, and then I was like, I think if we mix this into a multi-bar, so instead of having 2 pieces of steel, we start out with, I think maybe 13 layers, something like that, around there, 13 layers of alternating different types of steel, and we take some of the ship steel and layer in there with it, squeeze it all together, mix it all up, and it comes out with these really interesting patterns. It's a technique. It's either called laminating steel or Damascus steel. That's where that techniques originated was in Damascus in Turkey. And so we're not doing that exact thing, but we're getting close to it. And it just makes really beautiful, I think, pretty interesting shuckers. Just as cool as the other ones, but we can make them a little quicker. And so you're not having to pay crazy amounts of money.
Sure, no, absolutely. So everybody out there who has the Outer Banks shucker, lucky you, because those are gone and you're not going to make those again.
We have one. I have one left.
But we have the Sea Breeze shucker.
Yeah.
And that's what we are currently have, and that is what Billy, I think you've helped Billy to work with that. So Billy, do you want to jump in here and talk about making and helping Steve with those Sea Breeze shuckers?
Yeah, it's been an absolute blast to get to work on those shuckers, and I think one of my favorite parts about working on them is the etch at the end. When we're all done, they're all ground into shape. We found that every now and then on some of the shuckers, there will be just some layers that etch just slightly differently. And we tried to figure out, could it be something with our etch solution? Could it be how we polished them? And we've kind of tested all those, and we found that we can't figure out what it is. And we imagine that has to be those layers of ship steel coming through. And so for me, that's been one of the best parts about making it is, I'm working with it the whole time. And I'll often think about what I'm working with, and I'm working with steel literally off the side of a battleship. And, to see that come out in the end, where you can almost make it out and be able to point out, wow, there is actual battleship steel, and I can find it in all these layers. That's really been one of the most interesting parts, I think, of the process of those.
Well, that's so awesome. And Billy, sitting here looking at you, of course, our listeners can't see you, but I know you're young.
Yes,
you're a young
ma'am.
man. And how does that really feel to think, gosh, I'm working with steel that World War II guys were on? This is probably 60, 70, 80 years older than myself. So what's going through your mind?
It's hard to wrap your mind around a little bit. And I think Steve put it in the perfect way when he said humbling, because, like you said, this is, 80 plus years ahead of my time, and the deck boards are the same. And then I asked Steve one time if these deck boards were cut and made into boards for the ship back in the 30s. Imagine how old those trees were to be big enough to cut down and make into deck boards. So I realized what I'm working with is things, like a generation or two ahead of myself. And it it puts it into perspective, and it makes it hard to put into perspective at the same time, that, these things that I'm working with carry with themselves just so much history. And, I'm giving it its own new history by making it into something totally new to commemorate everything there. But it carries more history with itself than I could ever, attempt to recreate. So that's humbling, really is the best word. It's really an honor. It's really just super cool, super fun to work with these things.
Well, Billy, you've just said something that's blown my mind, because I'd never thought of the teak
Right.
that way. I just think, okay, here's the teak, and I think of it exactly with the steel, but I never thought, how old is that teak to have been harvested to be then put on the ship? So poof.
Yeah, 100
Right.
years. I mean, you're looking at 100 years plus, yeah.
That's huge. So wow, I had never thought of that. So great point, Billy. Now we have 3 of the products that you have done right now available: the Kill Devil's Hill, the Sugar Mountain knife,
Yep.
and the Seabreeze shucker. I have 2 little words that when I show something to somebody, I'm hoping that they say, because if they do, I know that there's an absolute winner. And I will say, but to both of y'all, that I have shown all 3 products to different people, friends I've known, or people who I work with here on the ship, and they will say, wow. And the second word is cool. And those are my 2 words. If people say, wow, and if they say, that's cool, I know that there's a winner there. And so that is said on all of those, and especially when someone is fortunate enough to where they're looking at all of them together, and they can sort of see how each one is different. Again, those words pop out, wow and cool. And then I'm going, yeah. Like the font. Yeah.
We say that in the shop a lot. Because, it's cool for us, and it's fun. Like what Billy was saying was, when you put it in the etch, so when you make the shucker or you make a knife, if you're making it out of a multi-bar steel, when you make it and you clean it all up, it looks like any ordinary knife until you put it in the acid. And the second you put it in the acid, those different layers color up differently, and you can see that pattern. It's like a magic trick. And so, we're literally, every time we're like, oh, put it in the edge, just so that we can see it. And then when we bring them out, you're like, that is so cool. It never gets old. It never gets old.
It really never does get old. It's like he said, such a funny sight, because you've got the both of us, all the shuckers ready to be etched in our hands, and we're both crowded over the etch solution so we can see that right on the dip. We're both hunched over right in front of it just so we can get that first look.
Well, y'all have just given me a new idea. Next time, please video that.
Oh, we will.
So that's
Sure.
and so we can share that on our website because I think that would be cool for other people to sort of see that. I would like to see it
Yeah.
myself. So yes. Oh, question about the acid. What acid is it?
It's
What
ferric
is-
chloride,
Ferric
which is
chloride.
it's a very mild acid. So you can put your fingers in it. I mean, like I'll reach in and like if I've got a shucker and it's we put them in little Tupperware containers with this acid. It's mixed 4-to-1 with water, and you can touch it with your fingers. If you have an open cut, it may burn. It's more salt than anything. And then you can neutralize it with ammonia. So literally, we'll pick it up and shoot it with Windex and neutralize it. So it's not a super caustic. But if you leave it for a long time, it will. It's almost like when I was a kid, you could take a penny. I'm sure you can still do this, but when I was a kid, we would take pennies and you put it in a bowl and you pour a little Coke over it. And then if you let the Coke sit there for an hour or so, you take your penny out and your penny be shiny. So there's enough acidity in that Coke to take the tarnish off. It's that same kind of thing. It's not, we're not using anything that's, that we have to have hazmat suits on or anything. It's the same kind of acid you etch computer boards with.
Oh, okay. Now, that's fascinating, and I don't like thinking about what Coke does. Being here from the South, I like my Coke, but I shouldn't. But so, tell me about the word Iron Man for you, because it's Iron Man Forge, Iron Man Knives. Where is that coming from?
So it's a little bit of a double entendre. I wanted to check some things off my bucket list, and I was involved in sports growing up. I was an all-state wrestler. Played football at Arkansas State and Southeast Missouri State for a year. So I was always competitive, and I was always involved in sports. Anyway, I wanted to do a triathlon. I had blown both my knees out playing sports when I was in high school and college. I don't have an ACL in either one of my knees. And I didn't know if I could do a triathlon because my knees would swell up if I walked a lot or ran a lot. Long story short, I did a triathlon. It actually rehabbed my knees. I have no trouble with them. Have had no trouble with them to this day. It strengthened all the muscles around them and this and that. So that was kind of my bucket list, was to do a triathlon and check it off. I had so much fun that then I did a longer one, and then I did a longer one, and I didn't tell anybody, but I kind of had in the back of my mind I wanted to do an Ironman. Well, fast forward, I've done 14 Ironmans, countless marathons. I qualified for Hawaii twice, and so I was very into mainly just competing with myself to see if I could do that. First off, to see if I could complete one, then to see if I could be competitive in one, and if I could qualify. And so I did those things. So when I started making knives, I was pretty much at the apex of that, and I needed a name for my knife company, and I'm like, Iron Man Knives. So that's what that means. It's both iron for the knives and iron for your body.
Sure. And visitors, you're going to have to excuse us, but we are recording this on the battleship, and visitors are here, and sometimes they're jumping around and everything. So if you hear any crazy noise maybe in the background, that's because we're on the ship. We love the ship, and visitors like to do their thing on the ship. Now, Billy, how did you find out about Steve, and what brought you to want to work with steel and wood and all of that type of good craftsmanship?
Well, one of my oldest interests since early teen years, I mean maybe 12, 13 years old, was blacksmithing. For some reason, I latched onto it. It was just something I thought was the coolest thing in the world. And, I would watch YouTube videos, I would read online, but that was about as close as I could get to it at the time. And I went to college and, I tried out a couple different things, and I ended up in fine arts and sculpture because I found I really wanted to work with my hands. I really wanted to work with materials like steel and build these things. And throughout the process, I created a really good mentorship and bond with my professor, my sculpture professor. And he had let slip to me one time that there was a forge in the sculpture department. It had just been broken for 16, 17 years. That was his mistake, because from then on I began to bug his ear off about, are we ever going to fix up the forge? Are we ever going to fix up the forge? Until one day Steve moved into town and put out feelers that he was looking for an intern. And obviously, having been in my professor's ear so much, he said, I know the perfect guy. So he, got me in contact with Steve, and we pretty much hit it off from there and just kind of started going. And I've been learning from him about 2 years now. And, pretty much all I'm doing now what I kind of always wanted to do, was learn bladesmithing, learn, working in a forge with hot metal and things like that. And then, fun fact, my professor gave me that forge and said, if you can fix it, then you can start using it. And I brought it back to him the next day, where I'd taken it to Steve's, and me and Steve fixed it up. And so now that forge, I've signed my name on it. That's going to be the forge in the sculpture department there at my school for the coming years. So
love to hear that.
Yeah, it was just really cool to, I was asking him if he was ever going to fix it. And then finally I got the chance to fix it myself. And now who knows how many years of students are going to get to use that forge and maybe get to pursue their interest in forging and blacksmithing and things like that, just off of my little interest.
Well, that's great. And I want everybody to know who's listening is that one of the things that people need to be aware of regarding your products, Steve, is that they're limited edition, most of them. I know that the Kill Devils is limited to 30, and the Sugar Mountain is, I think, limited to 40. And why did you choose to limit some of your product?
I like to create, and I like to make new things, and I like to make interesting things. And to me, having something special that nobody else has, or that only a few people have, is cooler than having something that everybody has. And so when I did these, I'm like, I want to do these, but I want to make them limited. I want them numbered. And then when they're done, they're gone. We're not doing them again. We'll do something cool, but we're going to do something else. And we just keep doing that. And I think it adds value and importance to the item, because if you want one, you should get one, because once they're gone, they're gone.
Do you hear that, everybody? Once they're gone, they are gone. And I know that those Kill Devil Hills are almost, I think we've sold half of the run of those. And so hurry up and get your now. Get your Kill Devils, get your Sugar Mountain. But we're going to keep the Sea Breeze oyster shuckers open. Because it's just going to be fun. But I'm excited that you get bored, both of you, that you get bored. And the reason is because I like to see the new products that y'all come up with.
Yeah.
Because it's so much fun.
Well, that's the exciting part. That's the exciting part of creating. The best part, Bert told me this one time. He said, the best part, you have an idea. He goes, there's two great times when you're making something. You have the idea, you're thinking it up, you're super excited, and then the next great time is when you're finished. And he goes, and it's the in-between that's really hard. So, and it's true, because sometimes you're like, this is going to be so awesome. And then like you ask, how long did it take you? That first night, it took 3 weeks just to get one out. And then they start coming out a little faster. But, as you're doing that, you're like, I'm ready to do something new, right? And then you want to be creative again, because that gets those creative juices going, and it's fun. It's like, what can I pull out of my head that I haven't seen before that we can use these materials for and be super cool? And that keeps me revved up. It keeps me excited.
Well, and Billy, really quick, what does that mean to you to think, oh gosh, what is Steve going to work on next?
I never know what to expect. When a new one's coming, I never know what to think is going on in his head, but that is the joy for me of it. It's kind of until he gets it on paper, he doesn't know, and until I start seeing it come together, it's in his head. He can see it, but when I see it start kind of forming, that is one of the funnest parts, is to see just little by little it's coming together until I see the finished product, and then I think, wow, you made something really cool. I can't wait to make a few of those, and that's really the funnest part, is seeing it come to life from just someone describing it to you, or from a sketch when it's not in your own head, seeing it actually come to fruition, hold it in your hand in the end is really fun.
Well, and again, I like that word, cool.
Yeah.
Cool equals good in my book. Well, is there anything else that y'all would like to say?
No, we're just really appreciative to be part of this, and we're honored to be part of it, and we just hope that other people see what we're doing and enjoy it and like it, and like I said, it's we're trying to put out heirlooms.
Mr. Steve, thank you so much. And again, everybody, go look at what Steve and Billy have done on Battlestar Collection. You're going to love it, and get yours now because they're limited edition. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. From the Battleship North Carolina in Wilmington, North Carolina, please check out the Showboats podcast webpage on battleshipnc.com. We have put some pictures of Steve and Billy and their knives on the podcast page, and hopefully some video will be coming soon. Of course, these products are available for sale on battlestarcollection.com.